All of your bodily systems are interconnected. So if one enters a state of dysfunction, it is going to be impacting all of the others in some shape or form ultimately.
Alex is a functional medicine certified practitioner with a master's in personalised nutrition. Alex is an oxygen advantage breathwork coach and studied transformational breathwork and psychedelic therapy.
A small amount of stress is going to strengthen us and build our resilience, but if we put too much stress on the system, then that could potentially reduce our resiliency because we don't have the capacity to put it and return to baseline.
And so how do you know where it turns from just an appropriate amount of stress to toxic, unproductive, unhelpful levels of stress? Because I struggle with that one.
Break resilience down into what I call the quadrants. So you could have physical resilience, you can have mental resilience, you can have emotional resilience, and you can have spiritual resilience. Something that I think is, to this day, not discussed enough is just...
Love it. Right. Tomorrow I shall experiment. Alex, sleep trackers, friend or foe?
Foe.
Okay. Why did you start drinking coffee?
For all of the many health benefits.
Amazing. Are you team cold plunge or team sauna?
Sauna.
Okay. Is there one supplement everybody should take?
Vitamin D / magnesium.
Okay. And what's the biggest myth around gut health?
Oh, biggest myth around gut health is that the gut is the root cause of all disease.
Interesting. Okay. Alex, welcome to the podcast. So for people who've been following Exhale for a while, you'll know Alex is our Chief Wellness Officer and has been since before we launched. But Alex actually is a functional medicine certified practitioner with a master's in personalised nutrition. Alex is a oxygen advantage breathwork coach and studied transformational breathwork and psychedelic therapy, and is the creator of the awesome Resilience program, which I want to get into today. But also is the founder of Healthpath, which is a kind of a gut microbiome testing and functional medicine technology platform and service. And Alex has coached me through my own health issues around 6 or 7 years ago. And has become a really good friend ever since. So welcome to the podcast and thank you for all the support over the years.
Oh, thank you for the introduction, for having me on and supporting me in many ways over the last few years as well.
Cool. So I wanted to get you on because we've had a few people on recently talking about cold water therapy and, obviously singing the praises of it. So I wanted to, at some point on the podcast, just go a bit deeper into that and just discuss is it for everybody and who should and shouldn't be doing it? But also I'm really interested in your Resilience program. So the podcast is all about the daily habits and routines and rituals that people can add into their life to help them live a happier, healthier life, a longer life, basically. And I think resilience is a huge part of that. And I think something that I've been trying to build into my own life from every aspect. And I think it's had a huge, huge benefit for me, really. So first of all, maybe actually, do you want to just explain what resilience is?
Yeah, and weirdly, it's a really, really hard question to answer. I think there are some papers that have been published whereby the interviewer has brought in professionals and experts in different areas of health and science, whether it's sort of psychology or immunology, etc., to try and get a consensus. But it's so specific that it is hard to say. So whatever definition you hear is kind of one way of thinking about resilience. And you can also break resilience down into what I call the quadrants. So you could have physical resilience, you can have mental resilience, you can have emotional resilience, and you can have spiritual resilience. And all four to some degree are interconnected as well. So working on one, according to even the research, will often improve other ones as well. So if you wanted the most highest level, all-encompassing concept of resiliency, you could say it is related to the ability of the organism to respond appropriately to the demands being placed on it with an ability to return back to baseline. And if you think about it from that really broad, generalized perspective, that is pertinent to whether we're talking about gut microbiome resilience or whether we're talking about immune resilience. So even within physical resilience, we can break it down perhaps into bodily parts, bodily systems. There's even papers on like cellular resilience, mitochondrial resilience. So it's kind of all context dependent. But it's generally this idea and I think ability to be able to navigate successfully through challenging times. And then you can kind of make it a little bit more specific based on what you're specifically talking about.
Your ability to get back to baseline is quite important in all of this.
Yeah, and
So
that's a really common, I would say, like nervous system lens of like resilience. It's your capacity, like what can you hold, so to speak, and maintain function. And if we start thinking about maybe like emotional mental resilience, how much can you hold while maintaining your core values, for example? So it's almost like, you've got your North Star, and are you able to maintain that when you are stressed, challenged, etc.?
So could you say that, like at a high level, one way to improve the way to improve your resilience across all four of these aspects, which we'll go into each in more detail, is to just subject you to small amounts of stress of each one of those different four types, and then small amounts of stress, and then you deal with that stress and you come back stronger, like the whole Hormesis
Exactly,
theory.
yeah. So the Hormesis is really the foundation of the resiliency research, I would say. And like my whole journey with resiliency started with a 2018 paper that was entitled like Acquired Resilience. And the overarching concept from that paper was, over our sort of evolution, we've been exposed to stressors that have allowed us to acquire resilience. So, and they listed things like we were forced into sort of famine and fasts. Like there wasn't an option. It wasn't a choice we did back in the day. It was just part of living. Then there was exposure to the elements like hot or cold and the wind, for example. There's ultraviolet light and sort of sunlight and the stress that brings on. And then they also spoke about toxins, meaning the polyphenols ultimately in foods that we consume that actually help us acquire resiliency as well. And that is all through that hormetic response, this idea that a small amount of stress is going to strengthen us and build our resilience. But if we put too much stress on the system, toxic stress, some might call it, or even just chronic stress from a psychological sort of perspective, then that it could potentially reduce our resiliency because we don't have the capacity to it and return to baseline.
And so how do you know, it's very hard to know where that line is, where it turns from just an appropriate amount of stress to toxic, unproductive, unhelpful levels of stress? Because I struggle with that one.
To be honest, I guess hindsight's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
And there's no way of definitively saying, this is the amount of exercise that you can do, or this is the amount of curcumin that you can consume. It's going to be a matter of a little bit of common sense and a little bit of hindsight. And the thought that comes up there is, people with chronic fatigue syndrome who are very much trying to figure out what is their capacity in regards to physical activity, so they can build their resilience and they can support mitochondrial biogenesis and all that kind of stuff, but also not experience sort of the post-exercise malaise and fatigue that they often experience if they do too much. And for some, walking down the stairs is too much. So it's very personal, and the only way of knowing is by trying to find what that capacity is ultimately.
Actually, what about HRV, heart rate variability? I feel like that's quite a good measure of stress levels, and something that I follow really closely. And for example, the last week, I've had a bit of a cold, been fighting off a bit of a cold, and my HRV has been lower than it would normally be. So like we have like a little Wednesday swim club. So on Wednesday, we normally swim out to a rock, and it's like 15 minutes in the sea, and it's quite cold at the minute. So I saw that my HRV was really unusually low in the morning. So I was like, right, okay, there's too much stress in my body or whatever, from whatever source it is. So I didn't swim around the rock. I just dipped in the sea for 2 minutes and got out. And, if it was especially low, I might not have even done that. So maybe is HRV, do you think it's quite a good measure, and what exactly is it for listeners?
Right. So it's been called the best biomarker of psychophysiological resilience. So the short answer is yes, it can be
Okay.
used. And for those that aren't familiar with the term, often when I ask clients if they're familiar with it, they kind of confuse it with heart rate, understandably. So I always kind of keep this really simple and say, look, if you had a heart rate of 60 beats a minute, what we don't want is that heart beating like a metronome on the second every second for 60 seconds. That would be a sign of kind of dysfunction or poor resilience ultimately. What we want is a high level of variability in time between each heartbeat. Now that's obviously on the level of like milliseconds in reality.
Right.
But those apps and those gadgets are essentially looking at that variability. And this is where there's nuance that has to be applied to interpreting HRV. So if you have a low HRV, let's say 20, that is really showing us that you're in a mobilized or activated, that kind of, people just say fight or flight stress sort of response. That is someone within the context of, let's say, gut health, who is likely not going to experience long-term success to a typical gut intervention, because actually one of the drivers of their symptoms is the fact that they have a nervous system stuck in a bit of a fight or flight activated response. Then you kind of often will hear that a high HRV, let's just say 90-ish or something like that, is good. Generally, that is true, but you've got to put it within the context of actually the health status of the individual, obviously. So you can get people who are in more of a, let's sort of say, a functional freeze response, whereby they're going to work, they're able to fulfill their life responsibilities, but they are absolutely crashing at the weekend and they're basically in bed most of the weekend, for example. That is someone who shouldn't have, so to speak, an HRV of 90. That is someone who's probably actually in more of a freeze state. Meaning, like the analogy maybe the deer in the headlights who's just frozen.
Oh, right.
In that situation, they're going to see an improvement in their health by actually their HRV coming down. But people who are in that kind of functional free state with a sort of a false high HRV are often also going to feel worse before they feel better, because you're going to have to move them out of that freeze state into more of a, let's call it coherent or balanced state. And to do that, there's going to be some degree of reactivity, and that often will manifest as some sort of anxiety, which might be confused with a reaction to a supplement or a die-off if someone starts an antimicrobial, etc. So it's really helpful to know where someone is with their HRV, and also how they're responding to the interventions that they're doing, or even just their lifestyle habits and their rituals. Like, is your nervous system responding positively or appropriately, or actually are we missing a piece of the puzzle here?
So yeah, it sounds like HRV is like a really good measure of how relaxed you are. And generally a higher HRV, the more variable your heart rate is, the higher the number is. And then that's a good thing, unless you get to this kind of too high, unusually high level. Yeah, okay, right. So let's get back to resilience. So 4 types of resilience: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. So maybe let's start with physical resilience. So what maybe what can it impact your what is your physical resilience, what can impact it, and how can we adapt some new habits into our lifestyle that can help improve it, build it?
So I guess we've kind of covered the physical resilience with the overarching definition, this idea of how much can you hold and maintain or return to baseline. So you would expect that, again, if you've had a stressful period, you're going to have that stress response, but can you just come back to baseline once that has passed? Because what you see in like the allostatic load research, and allostatic load is often just described as this accumulative wear and tear, really just because we're living, right? That we're all accumulating wear and tear. And we're kind of buffering that with our healthy lifestyle interventions, ultimately. Your antioxidants and your foods for gut microbiome, all of these things are kind of buffering that accumulated wear and tear. But we also get to that point where there's, some call it allostatic overload, whereby, and this is how I think about it at least, we don't have enough resources, like physiologically, psychologically, etc., to maintain homeostasis. So actually it's like you've gone over the edge and suddenly you're entering a new baseline of physiological state. So that's someone who's now got chronically low HRV. They have a good night's sleep if they're able to. They wake up and it's still rubbish. Like they've literally entered a new ecosystem in regards to how their body is working, so to speak. And in that situation, you need, the way I describe it is you need a potent enough stimulus and intervention to shift your overall physiology back into the baseline state. Because your physiology, the analogy could be like a spider's web. If you put on one thread, the whole web shifts instantly. But if you break that thread that you're pulling on, it's going to drop back down. But now the whole web is kind of, let's just say, too loose. It's not doing its job properly. And it's quite a little bit the same if we think about the human body from a systems biology perspective. All of your bodily systems are interconnected. So if one enters a state of dysfunction, it is going to be impacting all of the others in some shape or form ultimately. So physical resilience really is that ability to return to baseline. And they also have a term called resistance in some of the resiliency research.
Okay.
Resistance is, if I remember it correctly, it's basically how far can you go outside of your kind of baseline and return back. So without breaking the spider web thread, essentially. And again, that's another determining factor of your overall resilience. Like how far can you push yourself and come back? Some of us can't push ourselves very far. We've got what I call like physiological fragility. We're fragile because of a chronic infection or whatever's going on within our overall health and life. Others of us have a lot of resistance and we can really push it and still return back. And that's, a key part really of how resilient you are as well. So that's a little bit technical. Like it's not like you can test your resistance. It is a key kind of part of the overall concept, I think.
Okay, amazing. So, right, what can we do? What can we add? What can we do each day to try and improve our resilience, our resistance? What things can we do? How can we improve that? So when we're tested, we're not going to break that spider's web.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I'm actually, what I am going to say is there's a saying in functional medicine, which is treat the individual, not the disease. But I kind of change that, sometimes treat the individual, not the symptom, or treat the individual, not like the question in this case. So,
but what if it's someone who doesn't need treating? Like I'm listening to this and I don't think I need treating right now, but I imagine there's certain things I should do each day.
Yeah, and I think it still will come back to what areas are you most out of alignment on. So if you look at some of the resiliency scales that get used in the research, the best ones aren't just looking at like your cortisol levels and your blood pressure and your waist to hip ratio, which are all very traditional biomarkers of your resilience and allostatic loads. So that cumulative wear and tear. They will look at your emotional state and well-being, and they will look at your relationships and how much support you have there, etc. And you could argue, going through the course, I say this basically every week, like the topic I'm talking about is the most important topic on resilience because there's some really interesting research there. But social support, hands down, is going to be always one of the most important things. And we live more and more kind of isolated lives. We don't have the village anymore with parenting. It's often survival mode for many years. At least that's my experience. So you've got things like this. But if we break it down and if we stay with physical for now, because we haven't kind of looked at the others, you can think about it from several different parameters. So if we kind of just go through some of the topics, microbiome resilience. So microbiome resilience is not just about how resilient is your gut microbiome to, let's say, the next course of antibiotics that you have to go on. The research shows us that your microbiome resilience actually influences your systemic resiliency as well. So easy example, we talk a lot these days about psychobiotics, probiotics that influence our psychology, our emotional state via the gut-brain axis and other mechanisms as well. So you could say that, you don't need to have bloating or diarrhea to be like, well, actually adding some fermented foods into your diet daily is a way that you're going to build microbiome resilience, which is going to have a systemic impact on your overall resiliency. Something that I think is to this day not discussed enough is just dietary fiber. And I know that sounds so boring, but so many people don't hit their dietary fiber targets. Like for men, really 38, 40 grams of fiber a day. I don't think many people hit that at all. And if you start tracking it, even for like a day, if you put in your food into like a MyFitnessPal or whatever, and you just had a look at your fiber, you'll very quickly obviously know, okay, am I hitting my fiber intake daily or not?
How do you hit your fiber then? Where do you get what's the best place to get fiber?
I mean, fruit, vegetables, whole grains, but also if tolerated, your
Okay.
legumes, your lentils, things like your chickpeas,
Okay.
nuts and seeds will have a little bit. But people say to me like, oh, Alex, I have my apple and my banana. I have broccoli and loads of carrots. And like they have maybe 6, 7 veggies a day. But when you add that up, some of those aren't particularly fibrous. So I do think a lot of people miss out there. And especially if you're having like, an egg-based breakfast, a chicken salad, and then sort of a typical dinner, straight away you can see how there's not going to be enough fiber in there to support it. Now, fiber is not the only way to support the microbiome, but if you wanted one of the most powerful supplements for your overall well-being and to some degree longevity, fiber is actually one of them. So whether that's something like psyllium husk or something like PHGG that a lot of people know about these days, because all us nutritional therapists share our videos of dunking it in our Exhale coffee every morning.
Right.
That's another like very well-known fiber, but the data behind that stuff is just amazing. And not just for gut health, for like cholesterol, for cardiovascular health, for metabolic health, for cognitive health, for detoxification. Like the lists just go on and on.
So if you're someone who's maybe concerned about the fact that you're not getting enough fiber from your daily diet, would you say that they should, or everyone should, take some kind of...
I'm at a point, because I've been thinking about fiber a bit more recently, and I'm kind of at a point where I think the majority of us would probably benefit from it. Most people, and especially everyone listening, are health conscious. Most listeners are going to be taking some supplements already. And, a little bit tongue in cheek, but, should you be taking something like NMN for your longevity, or should you actually be optimizing your fiber intake? And I would argue fiber is going to give you a natural, more realistic improvement in your longevity and health rather than something as like micro specific as NMN.
Yeah. Okay. I could not agree more. Okay. In terms of like, what are the types of physical resilience? Then we talked a lot about the microbiome and the gut resilience, and what are the physical resilience? Because when you first said it, in my head, I was just like, okay, I need more resilient joints and bones and muscles and things. But actually, it's way more than that, isn't it?
It's kind of everything. One of the reasons I like resiliency, I think, is because most people might not even realize it, but what they're doing is building their resilience. So if we go back to the paper I mentioned, polyphenols. So whether that's your chlorogenic acid in your coffee, or whether that's your herbs and spices that you're adding to stir fries and to bolognese or etc. All of these polyphenols are improving cellular resilience. So getting lots of color and diversity of plants into your diet is a big resiliency factor. So again, we go back to everyone knows that they need their 30 different plant foods a week and all that kind of stuff. So that's building your resiliency from like a dietary sort of perspective. Along with kind of social support, though, I would say a really, really, really massive factor when it comes to what really moves the needle for your resiliency is exercise. So going back to what you just sort of said there, if you're not exercising, you are nowhere near as resilient as you can be. And I appreciate there are barriers and there are times in life when exercise can be a bit harder to kind of get in, etc. But it should always be something we're kind of striving for, because exercise... We're talking about muscle these days as its own organ. It's producing literally hundreds of chemicals when we're exercising that have all sorts of different properties on all sorts of different systems, cells, bodily tissues. So there are exokines, for example, these kind of immune modulating molecules that get released when we're contracting our muscles that can impact the brain health and cognition, that can impact our immune system, etc., etc. And we're all hearing the importance of muscle mass from a just general longevity perspective. For many different reasons. One, it's an endocrine organ producing these kind of health beneficial properties or molecules, but also, again, like you say, what is one of the biggest risk factors as we age? It's falling over and not being able to get back up. So having that strength in our body, in our joints, is really important on a very practical level, ultimately, as well.
So some amount of strength training,
so I think,
resistance training
is a must. But I do, as you know, Al, I like to sit on the fence quite a lot, or at least think about the opposing arguments. Which is, and there's an argument against this argument as well. I've been in my head a lot recently. The argument against it is like gym culture started in the 1970s,
Right.
And our health span has been declining ever since.
I mean, I've used that. I've heard that used in the context of so many things.
Right.
Seed oils were invented. This was invented.
Yeah. Yeah. So, my granddad was not pumping iron,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
he was independent until 92 years old in his house.
yeah,
But he was a farmer, and he was lifting barrels of hay and all sorts throughout his life.
yeah,
So there's kind of that side to it, which is, I think
yeah.
sometimes we use this as a bit of a bias if we are gym bunnies
Mm,
and gym bros because we like to
mm.
pump iron. The argument against that is just because our ancestors didn't do it doesn't mean that it's not optimal to get in the gym and to pump iron. There is this kind of thing that our ancestors and nature is always the best way to go, but there's no reason to actually say that's true in the context, certainly of exercise. Like
Yeah,
now we have
okay.
the accessibility of lifting weights and doing some resistance training. So that's just
Yeah.
has to be in a resiliency program.
Yeah, and I'd say for anyone who doesn't fancy going to the gym, you can do all these things at home, and there's a million different ways of doing resistance training. It's like
Yeah.
it's not there's no one type that everyone has to do. Literally, and I have my own strength training practice, and it's in our back garden, and I do it in the morning when I get up, and and it's totally unique. I was interviewing Dr. Rupy, and he has his own strength training program that I've never heard of anyone doing before. So it's all there's so many different ways of doing this. So just find the way that works for you, that fits into your life, and just do it. And it doesn't have to be like high, like intense, and you don't have to do it to failure even. There's even a lot of theories
Right.
that you should stop a couple of reps before failure, so you don't even work up a sweat. And I just it's more like meditative when I do it in the mornings. I've spent
Mm.
like 45 minutes in the dark, in the cold garden with my kind of hood up, just kind of slowly moving between these kind of little outdoor stations I have set up.
Right.
So, it's just, and the same for exercise as well. There's so many different ways of exercising cardiovascularly, and don't
Mm.
underestimate the power of just walking, just moving, just keep moving. I actually saw this, we shared in our email newsletter last week. There was a lady who's just about to turn 100 who was interviewed, and someone said, like, what's your secret? And she just said, just keep moving. And she said, I clean the house, all the time. And I even get on my hands and knees and cleaning the corners because the Hoover can't get in there. And she's like, I just make sure that I'm really thorough when I'm cleaning the house. And she's like, just keep moving.
Yeah,
So don't underestimate the power of just moving as much as possible.
definitely.
So,
And what I
yeah.
will say on that, especially with strength training, because I think a lot of people have, for various reasons, a bit of resistance and a barrier, and they don't think they'll like it. But I was a personal trainer for just over a decade, and
Right.
I genuinely can't think of a client who said that they didn't like strength training, who didn't find a way to fall in love with it. And I think,
Mm.
as you say, there are lots of different ways to do it. So it's maybe about finding the way that works for you. But also, I think there's just something really wonderful about feeling yourself getting stronger.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
feeling strong is a really brilliant feeling to experience.
Yeah.
And it can get quite addictive, I think, for some people,
Mm.
especially if you've got that sort of personality.
Feeling strong and feeling able,
Yeah.
and like you're in the supermarket and you lift up the heavy shopping bag and you're like, oh my God, I want to carry this heavy shopping bag just to prove to myself that I am now strong enough to do so,
Yeah.
and it's,
Yeah. Or
it's
your
addictive.
kids, your grandkids, like
Mm.
being strong is really important. And on that, in the research, there's a really strong link between exercise and mental and emotional resilience. So those who are exercising, and that doesn't have to be strength training here, just generally exercising, it does improve your mental emotional resiliency at the same time. And again, through
Okay.
probably different mechanisms here. So if you just want to be a sort of a stronger person from a general perspective, maybe thinking about like mindset and commitments, etc., then
Yeah.
exercise is a way that you can condition that, I think, on a psychological level as well. Because if you're walking up to that bar, it doesn't matter if
Mm.
it's 20 kilograms or 200 kilograms. If it's heavy for you, then it's a challenge. And you can cultivate that mindset around, I can do this, I'm getting stronger. And
Yeah.
the thing for me about strength training is, especially at the beginning, you see improvements in a week. Like you go back in the
Mm.
gym and you can feel stronger if your lifestyle is sort of relatively on point. So it's
Mm.
also got that, I think, almost dopamine hit maybe, whereby it's like, okay,
Mm.
I'm deadlifting 25 kilograms this week. That's awesome.
Yeah. Brilliant. So then let's move on to the mental resilience side of things, because I think the two are starting to get quite intertwined.
Yeah.
So maybe what does mental resilience mean exactly?
Mental resilience is really referring to your ability stay um, to stay connected with your values and your mission and to not get distracted. That's one of the
Interesting.
definitions I've seen, which kind of resonated with me. So for
Okay.
mental resilience, and to some degree for overall resilience, one of the first things you need to know is what your values are. Like, what is it that you stand for? What is it that is your North Star, like I mentioned earlier? And then your mental resilience is what's going to allow you to, so to speak, get there. And this is where, how many of us can set a goal, but then it quickly fades off for various reasons. We say yes to too many things would be a really common one. But if you know what your values are, what your mission, what your purpose is, and that doesn't obviously have to be grand and saving the world, it can be very small. But knowing that then allows you to even be able to be mentally resilient in the sense that you know that what is important for you. And then it's a matter of staying that path. And then
Mm,
once you know that, it's like, okay, well, if someone asks you into a new business venture or I don't know, even a night out, it could be anything really. You
mm,
can say, is this serving my values? Is this serving what I stand for? Does it align with me? And you're in a capacity to say, no, actually, I don't have time for that right now. I've got too many commitments, etc. So it also ties in with, overall personality types of like, are you a people pleaser, for example? Like I can put
yep.
my hand up. You,
I'm not, apparently.
uh,
We did this test recently that said you had a measure of agreeableness, and I was like 1 out of 10 or
I
something.
really,
Yeah, and Kirsty was like 10 out of 10. So
right.
it's a running joke in our house.
Yeah, I would probably be up there close to 10, I think. So yeah, knowing that can help you just navigate those sorts of day-to-day decisions that you're making as well.
I'm just going to interrupt today's podcast to say, if you're enjoying the conversation today, subscribe to our email newsletter. So we send out a weekly email sharing the breakdown of the latest podcast episode that comes out every Tuesday. And then every Sunday, me and my wife and co-founder Kirsty send an email newsletter out. I think we're up to edition 200 now. We've been sending it out every week, every Sunday for the last 3 years. And we literally keep our finger on the health and wellness pulse. We share the latest research, the latest trends, hacks, science, and more. So head to exhalecoffee.com and subscribe to our email newsletter, or click the link in the show notes. Right, back to the show. Well, I think a lot of people don't know, they don't have their North Star, they don't have
Yeah.
their dream, their goal. I think a part of that is because they think that it's just too unattainable to ever dream, and that they could
Mm.
never get there. So they've kind of, as a self-preservation mechanism, stopped dreaming, perhaps. I'd say, for me, I think what's been really helpful is always having like a long-term vision for how I want my life to be. And back when I was in London as working as an accountant, accounting wasn't for me, London wasn't for me. And then I knew the type of life that I wanted, and I was so far away from that life in London. And I literally used to cry myself to sleep some nights about how far away from that life I was. But the fact that I knew what my life ultimately, what I wanted it to look like, meant that every decision I made, I kind of adjudged the decision through the lens of that. And it was just a million small decisions have led me to the life that I dreamt of
Right.
10 years ago. So, but if I didn't know that was the life that I wanted, then I wouldn't have made those decisions. And probably half of them might have gone against
Yeah.
moving me towards it and moving me backwards. So I think, okay, so what should people do? So does everyone need to sit down, work out their vision? How do you do that? Is there a framework? Is there a way?
I think it starts, and I think with some of these things also, it's not a matter of thinking that you're just going to get it either. Like patience is such an important part of all of this sort of process. So you could say that it kind of starts with starting, not, getting there straight away, starting to cultivate a sense of like self-awareness. So there's a lot of research on mindfulness and resilience from a mental and an emotional resiliency perspective in particular, but also it will impact physical resilience when we think of inflammatory markers and that kind of stuff. But yes, sitting down and just starting to ask yourself, what is important for me? And most of us have heard those kind of questions around, close your eyes and give yourself a few minutes to visualize yourself on your rocking chair, on your deck, as I like to think about it, when you're 90 years old, looking back, what was a successful life? What was important for you? What would you regret? And just ask those kind of philosophical, kind of life coaching type questions to just get a sense of what is important for you. Bearing in mind that might change in different stages of life as well. I've got a 4-year-old and a just 2-year-old. And right now, like, my main priority is just being a good dad and being present as much as possible. Like, as long as the business is ticking over, then that's cool. That I can return to that in a few years' time. So again, kind of allowing yourself to know that these things are going to adapt based on where you're at as well. You can also just go to Google and Google something like a values list. You can download a PDF, or there'll be blogs where it will give you like 50, 100 different sort of adjectives like excitement, adventure, authenticity, honesty, health, wealth. And it's like, you can just spend a little bit of time going, okay, well, what really is resonating with me right now? And that starts to give you a sense of what is important to you and what your values are. And then you can kind of go from there ultimately as well. But I do think, knowing your values, it's not always that easy, because I think there are kind of primary values, secondary values, and there's a hierarchy that can kind of get involved there as well. But it's still a really helpful exercise.
Yep.
And one of the realizations for me that came up, I think, with sort of building the resiliency program was resiliency really does start with a degree of self-awareness. Like, if you don't actually know yourself, I don't think in certain definitions of resiliency, you could ever be that resilient ultimately. Because resiliency is such a context dependent thing. Let's say you have, let's think about it. Let's say you've either had a significant loss in your life. Like, are you really expected to return to baseline? I would argue, no, you might be changed forever. So resiliency isn't about returning to baseline. It's about how do you navigate and find a new baseline, and how do you, through that time, maintain either some of your core values, or how do you learn to say, those values don't matter anymore. I need a new set of values. Or if you've been diagnosed with a condition that is thought to be sort of untreatable, you can't go back to baseline. So resiliency isn't about returning to baseline. It's about how you handle that situation. And that is going to be partly determined based on your values.
Okay.
My final point there is, take someone like, is it Ross Edgley, like an adventurer, athlete. His priority is going to be, in certain instances, like performance over everything. And like, if you've seen pictures of his skin and tongue post some of his adventures, a priority for him there isn't his health, it is getting the job done. So again, like, dependent on the context, you can't really say, oh, that person's not resilient because actually they're struggling with X, Y, and Z. And you can be a really resilient person with PTSD or trauma. So again, let's not base resiliency on some biohacker who's symptom-free and sunning his balls at 6 a.m. Like, you've got to think about it from a much broader perspective here. Like, how are you handling the life that person's been given? And I know people who are way more resilient than others. So my final point is, your resilience is going to be proven by what you've been through in life. Ultimately, if you've had a really comfortable life, fortunately, you don't actually know how resilient you are. Whereas if you've been dealt a hard deck, then you're probably already more resilient than a fair percentage of people.
So this is all good and well, but how these life events, the death of a loved one, they're going to get thrown at you. So is there anything that what can we be doing now to prepare ourselves so that we are more resilient when the time comes, and that we are able to deal with these things better? Because, what can prepare us?
Everything we've been talking about, obviously, because it's all interconnected. So again, understanding these things, but also, I guess maybe the things like a loss is an extreme example, even though we will all experience it to some degree. But then you could start to say, for me, that's where the support and your network come in those sorts of situations. So like, also, how strong are your relationships, either with kind of your partner but also friends, family? That's going to be so important in those sorts of times. So cultivating your relationships And for some people listening, it might just be that they have a realization that, oh, you know what? I haven't been investing in those relationships. I've been taking them a little bit for granted, or I haven't been showing up, or I could just put in an extra 1% in that relationship, or I could drop them a text more frequently, just check in. Like, just start to form and nurture those relationships, not because you got like, oh God, I'm going to need him in 10 years from now, but because that social network is one of the biggest things when it comes to your health. The research is pretty clear on that. So
That's so interesting.
that's one thing to consider. And I also think, this is where the state of your nervous system really does come into it, because obviously if you're already in a fight or flight chronic response for whatever reason, you are going to really struggle to navigate those sorts of life transitions ultimately. Whereas if you are more grounded with a more regulated nervous system, you're going to be able to navigate those things with a little bit more, I was going to say grace, that might not be the best word, but like you're going to be able to more easily handle it. If nothing else, because you're going to be able to show up, meaning you're going to be more in contact with your emotional self. So you can process those emotions because you actually have a better relationship with them, if that makes sense. And that's where things like breath work, I think, can be really helpful. That's where therapy can be really helpful, because they're all about bringing ourselves back to us.
You've mentioned the whole relationships and the community thing a few times. And I feel like for a lot of people, that'll feel like the hardest one to, because sleep, you can read for 10 minutes before bed. That might help you sleep. You can turn off your lights. There's these certain functional things that you can do. But for I guess the relationships, the social side, the community side is the hardest one. And like, there's a few things you mentioned already, maybe just being a bit more present with your friends and family and actually reaching out to people and responding when they message you, respond quickly and have a conversation. Don't wait 3, 4, 5 days to respond to them, because, that's not how communication works. And it's probably not acceptable, and I'm terrible at it myself. But then on the community side, I'd say like, my advice would be that there's so much community going on, because there's so many people who feel on their own and isolated and not part of a community, and like there is no community anywhere, but there's so much around it and you just have to look for it. Or even, and if there's nothing, create it, and like when we moved to Portugal, we had a friend move over like a year later, and he said, before he moved over, he said, oh, so what's the community like over there? Because I really love my local London community. And I was like, oh, I don't really know if there is much community. I know there's a lot of nice people, but there's a lot of lovely people around that I don't really see. Does that mean that there's community here? Probably not, if none of us spend time together. I'm just aware of each other's existence. So that's why I set up the swimming club. It was just literally just so we could get some community and build a bit of community in the area and add to the community rather than just kind of taking. And then on the back of that, other people have started. Someone started a walking club, someone started a book club, someone started a running club, and we've had this explosion of clubs. And now there's so many different clubs going on here that you wouldn't know they existed if you weren't looking for them. But if you like just Googled it or asked around, then there's all sorts of different clubs where you can get a bit of community. And you don't have to be like deeply passionate about that particular thing. Half the people come to our swim club not to swim. They just have a dip. But we all have a cup of coffee on the beach afterwards and a chat. And we have a WhatsApp group where we all support each other on absolutely everything now. And 3.5 years later, it's like the part of my life where community is the strongest. So I think, it's easy to, feel really lost and on your own, but like really like community's out there if you look for it.
Yeah. And what's the saying? We underestimate what we can do in 5 years and overestimate what we can do in 1.
Yeah.
I think it's that way around. So it's this idea of, there's got to be a long-term game plan with a lot of these things as well. And going back to the Sky cycling team, it's those 1% margins that over time are all accumulating to a significant shift. And there's a real sense of urgency that I think most of us have when it comes to like health and healing. And if we can find a way just to loosen our grip over that and be like, okay, 5 years from now, life's going to be like this, it's going to look like this, and then break it down from there. That's the way to go about it. And then that kind of just came up thinking about like, as you were saying, community, like it can take time to build, especially if you're the one building it. But start small and then kind of go from there. Even if it's starting online, and then moving to in person, depending on where you live and these sorts of things. But
Mm.
it is foundational, and it's literally kind of hardwired into our DNA that we are
Yeah.
social creatures and we live in community. And it's
Mm.
arguably the biggest reason why we're seeing some of what we see in sort of the health epidemics that we're in.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. I couldn't agree more, like, honestly. Okay, so then the other two types of resilience are emotional resilience, which I think this probably is feeds into somehow. So like so maybe explain emotional resilience. Yeah,
Yeah,
how does that play
emotional
into all this?
resilience, you could say it's a little bit like sort of the physical in the sense that it's your ability to cultivate positive emotional states, but also return to it again.
Mm.
So like, does something bad happen and then you kind of wallow in misery for the next week? Or do you have tools and a skill set that allow you to actually return to a more neutral state? Or ultimately, we want your baseline to be obviously kind of optimistic, positive. So it's really how you're able to manage and navigate your emotional existence, and how much autonomy is there coming, how much agency do you have over your emotional self? Like some of
Yeah.
us will
So
wait.
is that a good baseline for people to aim for then? Optimistic, positive.
I
Should that be our
think,
baseline?
yeah, like when you look at
Yeah.
the sort of psychological, emotional resilience literature, optimism is absolutely one of like the running themes in like
Okay.
what makes someone resilient. Like they generally have a tendency towards optimism, as an example.
Mm.
And although we might have a innate tendency towards like optimism or pessimism, it is at the same time absolutely a skill that can be cultivated with practice. So again, I think it's important to appreciate that yes, we have our kind of personality. We might be more of an introvert or an extrovert. But
Mm.
again, we can be more introvert in certain situations than others, etc., etc. So these things I think are malleable. And actually, some of the psychedelic research really shows that to be the case, like how malleable our personality can be if we do like, the really deep work, so to speak.
Okay, so cultivated with practice. How do
Yeah,
we how do we cultivate it with what practice?
by practicing it. So
Okay,
again, and that comes back to mindfulness, like being
yeah,
aware of what is happening with your inner dialogue and like catching yourself. It doesn't have to be overly complicated. I remember speaking to Dr. Germer, who is I think like a professor slash researcher in self-compassion. I said to him, I remember walking through the supermarket once and forgetting to buy something. And then I was really aware of like this inner critic that came online, and I literally laughed out loud having heard what this part of me was saying. And it's like, how often does that happen for us? Or are we stuck in the narrative and we're not really stepping back? So again,
mm,
for me, it's a matter of slowing things down and cultivating a relationship with our parts and ourself. Because if you're not aware of your inner dialogue and what you're saying to yourself or others, there's no chance that you can change it. But if you can practice a little bit of mindfulness, and that could be anything from downloading an app and using that, something like Calm or Headspace, just as two examples. It could be as simple as returning to the breath and being aware of your breath for 5 minutes in the morning. It
right.
could be lighting a candle and looking at the flame for 5 minutes. Like, there are lots, it could be informal mindfulness. There's a great book just called Mindfulness. I forget the
Yeah.
author, but it's a yellow cover and it's just called Mindfulness. And she talks a little bit about informal mindfulness. Like when you're doing the dishes, what are you doing? Can you be with it? Can you be with the dishes? So again, rather than
It's
being,
so hard though. When you're so busy and you've got so much going, so many people are just so busy, you have so much going on in your head, it's hard to remember to be mindfully aware of what you're doing or any of these things. So
yeah,
I feel like it is useful to have some like practice that you force yourself to do that then maybe like will start spreading out into the rest of your life and will just become like an innate behavior or whatever. But like I like the idea of like the 5 minute focus on the breath in the mornings.
yeah.
Like what exactly would if I wanted to start doing that tomorrow, how should I approach that?
So a really well kind of researched breath is called coherent breath or coherent breathing, which is just the time can be different, but it's, let's say, 5-second inhale, 5-second exhale with no pause between the two. So you're just breathing in for 5, exhaling for 5, breathing in for 5, but it could be 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So the key is that the inhale and exhale are the same length.
Right.
And most people, in my experience, will find that somewhere between 5 and 10 feels comfortable for them. So it's whatever feels right. That has been shown to be very beneficial when it comes to things like the autonomic nervous system. You don't have to do it perfectly. So you could either download like a metronome sort of thing on your phone, and you could have a beat that is helping you with the count, or you can just count it in your head. It's a mindfulness practice, and it's returning you to the breath as your kind of anchor.
And do that for 5 minutes.
Yeah, for 5 minutes. I think I kind of say to clients, look, if you can build up to 20 minutes, 20 minutes can be life changing. In my personal experience, and it can also be quite addictive because you feel so freaking good giving yourself that time just to come back to the breath. And whenever I've been consistent with this, because I do, like many of us, wax and wane with certain practices, but like I will be standing on the train platform and I'll close my eyes and I'll go back to the breath because it's such a nice feeling to be embodied in your body, calming the nervous system and returning to that kind of restful state. Now, as you say, one of the challenges is I think so many of us are so busy and therefore stressed that our baseline is one of stress. And like the first time I came across this was with the HeartMath Institute, but they sort of talked about we will always seek familiarity. So if what's familiar for you is stress, and that state, that feeling of adrenaline, cortisol flowing around, you will kind of unconsciously just do things to create that state because that's familiar, and what's familiar is safe. So for some of us, being calm and regulated will not feel safe and actually can trigger anxiety because of that. So there's so much nuance and context that has to happen here. And that might be that you keep your eyes open to begin with and come to the breath. It might be that you do this, in your bedroom or in your bed where you might feel your safest, etc. So just be mindful of like, where do you feel your baseline is and what is familiar for you? And dependent on your baseline will determine how long this will take before you start to maybe notice, as you mentioned, that ripple effect into other areas of life that often happens with these sorts of practices.
Then is that basically meditation then?
Well, good question. What is meditation? I would say it's meditative, certainly.
Okay.
And then I say, look, 5 minutes to start your day. I think it's a wonderful way to start your day if you can.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, to support your ability to fall into a nice restful sleep. And then I kind of refer to these kind of pit stops in the day. Like, can you have, whether it's 60 seconds or whether it's 5 minutes, like, can you set an alarm on your phone or your watch so you've got that reminder to say, right, okay, I'm just going to give myself 60 seconds before I do that next email. I'm going to return to my breath and I'm going to slow it down and I'm going to do a 5 in, 5 out, or just I'm going to focus on diaphragmatic breathing, which really means you're breathing into your belly, put very simply. Because a lot of us, including myself, still, you're getting through your emails, and if you return to your breath, you might realize that you haven't breathed in 20 seconds. I'd certainly am like that with emails, where you're just like getting through it, and you're not actually in the body anymore. So,
I find myself like some days at work, and I just suddenly gasp and go,
yeah, exactly.
because you forgot to breathe.
And you see it in clinic, people telling you a
Yeah.
story, they're speaking 1,000 miles an hour, and every sort of 60 seconds, it's like, and it's like, okay, like, let's just take a step back, sit back into your chair, slow down, take a breath, and just what's present right now.
Love it. Right. Tomorrow I shall experiment. So let's talk about emotional resilience.
Spiritual.
Sorry, spiritual resilience. So let's go. Yeah. So do you want to explain spiritual resilience? Because that is definitely something I've not personally thought about.
Yeah.
Recently.
So spiritual resilience for me ties in a little bit with mental resilience in the sense that it still comes back to like your values and knowing your values, but it's also about being able to maintain them in hard times. It's very easy when we're going through a hard time just to slack off with something. So what is your ability to stay true to that? Like, will you, I don't know, easy example, something like when you're stressed and really busy, does exercise just go out the window or do you get up earlier and do it?
Okay.
As just an easy example, maybe. Like, I am someone that when I feel a bit overwhelmed, exercise is something that often actually I find much harder to do than if I'm in a more regulated state. Or could you shift your exercise and could you just go for a walk in nature rather than kind of hitting the gym? Like, but can you maintain that value in some shape or form? But spiritual resilience is also about being connected to something deeper and bigger than yourself. And this is where I think, those kind of practices that can get you into like an altered state of consciousness for some
Mhm.
is a way that for the first time we actually tap into what that means. But yeah, if you can connect with something bigger than yourself, whatever you might want to call that, God, nature, um, anything ultimately. But yeah, something bigger than you. Like what's behind reality, consciousness, the universe, etc.
Even your values, your set of values, I feel like you could in some way think of those as being bigger than yourself because, I think I'm I'm a Myers-Briggs INFP, which apparently means that I have a strong set of values, and I do have a strong set of values, and they are more powerful than me. So, my
Oh,
word is my word, and my values are so strong that I would never deviate from them and never question them, because they're bigger than me. So even if it's not like a spiritual, connection, I guess having that strong, I don't know if it is that like a stoic mentality, mate. I don't know.
yeah, it sounds
But
like
yeah.
maybe, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So yeah, I think you can find the source of that from lots of different places.
Definitely. And there'll
Yeah.
be, again, like life events that really help with it as well. Like I was listening to or I heard, I think it might have just been like an Instagram reel, but a lot of men and women who were really big on around sort of business who
Mhm.
become a parent and then it totally transforms and their purpose is more about
Mm,
providing and supporting their family. And that might mean that they still kind of are obviously really focused on their business, but maybe hours change a little bit, or maybe values do shift a little bit. So, there are transitions where these things all shift as well. And it's kind of knowing, is this a genuine shift? Or am I kind of, maybe lying to myself a little bit there and making it easier? So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Okay, brilliant. Okay, this has all been amazing. So, last topic I want to discuss is, which does tie into this, is the cold water
Ooh.
therapy, cold water ice baths. It's exploded in popularity. There's so many people who are doing it to extremes. I was one of them. But and I feel like there are a lot of benefits around promoting your kind of physical resilience and around the immune system and those kind of things, but also mental resilience. And that's one of those things. If you can get into the cold every single day, something that you really hate doing, then when you do have to deal with something you have to do something that is really tough that you really don't want to do, then you find it easier to take that step if every day you're breaking those walls. But maybe, do you want to explain something a little bit around maybe first the physical benefits, so the physical resilience benefits of cold water?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting one. So there's been, it looks like there's been like a really big increase in the research in like the last 2, 3, 4 years.
Okay.
Certainly like some systematic reviews coming out about cold water immersion. I guess the first thing to
Interesting.
appreciate is most of the research is within the context of performance. There's almost nothing within the context of like general wellness. So the
Okay.
first thing
Yeah.
to bear in mind is like if you are, one of these sort of PubMed evidence-based people,
Yeah.
which I am partly, there's very little research when it comes to general wellness. In fact, there's a study that came
Okay.
out this month. There's, I think, a cross-sectional study, and what they found was a U-shaped curve, meaning 2 times a week of cold immersion had a positive impact on things like upper respiratory tract infections. But more than 2 times a week, as you increase the prevalence,
Mhm.
that drops. So if you're doing
Interesting.
it like every day, according to at
Yeah.
least some of the research we have, you are not necessarily having an impact on your immune resilience. You could even be jeopardizing it.
Wow. Was that a big
Um,
study? Was that
it
a
wasn't a
kind of
big
a
study.
legit
I
study?
mean, none of these are massive ultimately. I
Yeah.
think like there was a systematic review I saw this morning. I think the total participant count was like 3,000, which isn't bad,
Okay.
but it's obviously not
Yeah,
like
yeah.
as big as some of the coffee
Mhm.
systematic reviews.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then also it's very much like, what is it that you're trying to achieve? Because everyone talks about cold immersion and like almost, so at least from what I see often, a bit like generically, like it's good for you, full stop. Like, well, in what way is it good for you? If your priority is muscle mass or strength, do not do cold plunges after your training. because there's an increasing amount of research showing us that actually cold water immersion post exercise, if your goal is increasing your muscle mass or strength and potentially power, but I think there's a little bit more conflicting info there, you are jeopardizing those gains by doing cold water immersion after your exercise.
Interesting.
If your priority is a reduction in DOMS, like muscle soreness and recovery, then cold water immersion may be favorable. Interestingly, from what I've seen of the actual literature, the temperature and the duration don't seem to actually matter that much.
Right.
So a lot of the studies are using a 10 to 15 Celsius water, but how a lot of the guys on Instagram are like 0 or 4 Celsius.
Breaking the ice.
Yeah, like the colder the better. And like I think to be honest, for me it feels like maybe that's just a massive ego thing.
Oh, really? And is there not much research into that then?
Not from what I've read in those reviews. Like often the studies were 10 to 15, and in the conclusions they also, and in the sort of the papers, they say like it doesn't seem that temperature duration have a big impact on what they were looking at, like certain immune cells and the increase in monocytes or lymphocytes, etc., that people discuss. Like I don't think you need to be going down to 4 Celsius water to actually have a lot of that. There's even some research that has seen an increase in inflammatory markers post cold water immersion. So this idea that it's anti-inflammatory, we've got some data suggest it's not always the case. And then I guess the really big thing that's been trending at the moment, thanks to the likes of Dr. Stacey Sims, is like how women should be doing this differently to men, because as she says, women aren't just little men. So she talks about using women potentially, according to her, will benefit from slightly higher temperatures, like 15, 16 Celsius.
Okay.
And they don't need to be doing it as long from memory either, but certainly like they shouldn't be doing 4 Celsius stuff. I think, again, it's kind of context dependent. So most of my cold water immersion, like me and Katie love getting in the ocean in January and February, like when we're down in the Southwest. But cold water showers is kind of my more usual way of getting some. And there have been times when I've done it when I know I kind of shouldn't have, but it has kind of given me a nice wake up and therefore I still did it.
Okay.
So again, like what's going on with mitochondrial function? What's going on with thyroid function? What's going on with your autonomic nervous system? It is absolutely not for everyone. And you could get into different mechanisms here, but I also kind of just, maybe I'm getting lazy with age, but how do you feel doing it? Like you get people who say, oh, Alex, like I tried cold water shower to finish my shower every morning, but I'm just cold for the rest of the day. It's like, okay, well, that's your body clearly telling us that you are not in a state for cold water immersion. So just do your hot showers. And if anything, go and do some saunas. From like a traditional Chinese medicine perspective, like you can start to think about things from that perspective as well. So it is very context dependent. Now there is a study, it might even be the cross-sectional one, whereby there was a reduced incident of basically absenteeism with cold water immersion. So we do have data suggesting that it can, in the long term, be of benefit to our overall immune resilience, because immune resilience is partly our ability to mount a sort of appropriate inflammatory response to inflammatory stimuli. So if you're immune resilient, you get exposed to a bug, but you don't mount this massive inflammatory response, which can cause a lot of cellular damage, which can cause some of the long-term symptoms. You are able to clear it without as much of a potent inflammatory response, which is really interesting. And that takes us a little bit to that really famous Wim Hof study, whereby, they practiced the Wim Hof technique, they got exposed to an endotoxin, and those that did the Wim Hof technique didn't manifest the symptoms of kind of, the flu sort of thing. They didn't have the increased body temperature and the symptoms.
Okay, so to get those benefits then, so you're saying, the water doesn't need to be that cold, like 10 to 15 degrees twice a week. So even to get
twice
the immune,
a week was the sweet
what about the
spot.
What about the immune benefits though? Is that would you say similar twice a week?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was the exact same study that said twice a week is the best from like just an upper respiratory tract infection kind of thing. But in regards to like work absenteeism, it was also, that kind of, those variables were at play.
And if you were going to do cold showers, I think in the winter that probably does drop to about 10 to 15 degrees. So it probably is the perfect temperature. And is
Yeah.
that something a couple of times a week again is fine?
I think with that, probably daily, because it's just not,
Mm,
I don't see that being as immersive, literally,
yeah,
as
okay,
kind of getting
yeah,
into like a whole bath of ice
yeah,
water. So
yeah.
that probably is something you can do. But there's also a study, and I know people like Ryan Carter, Carrie Bennett talk about it, which is you can get benefits from just exposing your face to cold water.
Mm,
And there's a study that actually was talking about cold water immersion from a neurohormesis perspective. So going back to the hormesis concept, we talked about a little bit of stress is a good thing.
mhm,
There's some research, certainly animal data, that would suggest that cold water immersion may be beneficial in reducing your risk of neurodegenerative sort of conditions, Parkinson's, dementia, etc. But we've got 10 times the amount of cold receptors on our face to warm receptors, whereas in the hands it's 5-to-1 ratio apparently. So getting some cold water, maybe putting some ice cubes in it, and literally splashing your face with cold water is activating the vagus nerve, and you're still getting some of those kind of responses we talk about with cold water immersion therapy.
so
So
that's why that guy is going viral on Instagram who
what,
gets the
dunking
bottle
his
of
head?
Saratoga water or whatever, and in the ice, the bowl of water full of ice, and he dunks his face in it.
Yeah,
That's so that is based on
exactly.
something
So
interesting.
you've
I
got
thought,
loads of receptors that are going to be stimulated by doing that, which is sending a message to the brain, which is then sending messages through the body. So yeah, there's validity to just dunking your face as well.
so that's quite an easy one to add into your daily routine.
Yeah,
I feel like I feel like I'm not the kind of person who, I've talked in other podcasts where I've had a lot of issues with cold water and ice baths and stuff like that. And I feel like I'm very reluctant to jump straight back into it, but it sounds like maybe I could get some of the benefits by actually just every day just dunking my face into some cold water.
yeah,
As in legit, genuine. Okay. I think we definitely overcomplicate things. We overcomplicate health. We try and do everything. We listen to everybody, and then we try and do, some of us anyway, try and do everything everybody says, which
yeah.
makes being healthy ridiculously complicated. So yeah, okay, cool. Right. Well, thank you, Alex. I think before we leave, we always ask every guest on the podcast the same three final questions.
Oh, okay.
First one, what's one habit that you're trying to stop?
Oh, good question. I would say in truth, I'm not necessarily like consciously trying to stop something right now, but something that I should um, is I've got in a habit of snacking. And
Yeah,
I'd like to get out of that and get back to like 3 square meals a day.
we're exactly the same. Me and Kirsty talk about it daily. Yeah, okay, perfect. So, next one, what's the most overrated piece of health advice?
Oh gosh, that's a hard one. Um, Probably cold water immersion.
Okay. Um, and what's one habit you think those listening should add to their daily life? What's the biggest hitting one simple habit that everyone should add?
I think some kind of it's a hard like contemplative practice, like we've been touching on. Like
Okay.
I think the thing that can really that a lot of people are lacking from my perspective, and something I'm constantly trying to work on is just that connection with ourselves. So
Mm,
whether it is like coming to the breath, or whether it's looking at a candle, just bring a little bit of stillness into your day at whatever point is most convenient, and then potentially asking yourself a question, whether that's from a journal that you've bought, or whether it's something as simple as what's showing up for me right now if I give myself space. Because we're, as you say, everyone is too busy. Everyone's running around. Everyone's got way too many responsibilities these days.
yeah,
Prices are
yeah.
going up, etc., etc. Can you give yourself 5 minutes to just look within and see what's there, and then respond however you need to respond? That might be doing a little bit of a journal entry, and that could be as simple as saying pen to paper, and that's it. Like, don't have a question. Like, this is a valid journaling exercise, which is just write whatever is coming out of your kind of consciousness, so to speak. It
Mm.
could be something like that. Or it could just be that you have once a week. I'm going to give you 2 tips if that's okay.
No, please do.
The other one that Katie, my wife, and I are really trying to work on is like a dedicated opportunity where we connect every week and say, what's happening? Where do you need help? Where am I not showing up for you? What's going on in our family unit? Where are we at with kind of what we're trying to achieve with our vision? So again, bringing in that family resilience, which is another topic that we do within the resiliency program, because let's face it, if you're not in a happy family unit, there's not much chance of anything else going particularly well, in my experience. Like, you've got to have a solid foundation within your home
Yeah.
for everything else to be able to move forward in like a really positive, empowering way.
Yeah, I've heard of people doing that with their kids. Actually, our next door neighbours do it with their kids, and it's really inspired us to do it. And we've talked about doing it for ages. Haven't quite got around to doing it yet, but I guess you just need to, like, to make these things a habit, you need to set a time and just go out every Wednesday evening before you take the kids to this club. You sit down for half an hour and have this conversation or something. You need it built. Otherwise, if you don't allocate a time to it, almost, I just think things don't happen. You don't do it.
And
It's easy to forget these things.
That's a really big James Clear tip, isn't it? The research actually shows if you write down the specifics, you are more likely to do it. So if, as you say, Wednesday, 6:30 p.m, dining room table, 30 minutes, that's when it happens. If you don't put that down, it will get to Sunday evening. You're going to be too tired. You'll be like, we'll start next week.
Yeah.
Even the simple idea of having a confirmed time and place does seem to increase likelihood you're going to actually do it. So yeah.
It's so funny. I've not read that book. It's like one of the only books I've probably not read. I've read so many books. I feel like I probably should read that book before. I should have read that before launching this podcast, because this podcast is just going to be a series of moments of me having epiphanies and realizing things that he's explained in that book. So,
Right.
okay,
It is a
that's
really
my
good book.
bedtime reading. Is there anything that you want to, where can people find you? Is there anything you'd like to give a little plug to that you're working on at the minute?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram, Alexander Manos. I'm not particularly prevalent right now on it, but you can obviously look at all of my past kind of content and what comes up. I'm launching a new course with a colleague in January called Mold Mastery. So this is going to be obviously for anyone that is struggling with a mold-related illness, as I call it. So if you've lived in a water-damaged property, or you are living in a moldy property and you feel your health has been impacted, this course is really trying to help navigate for you, what you need to know, what tests are out there, what you can do, and like to give you that template to kind of heal and recover.
Cool.
There's obviously the resiliency program, which at the moment is kind of a self-paced course. So you watch the webinars in your own time, and then there's like a live Q&A, so we can kind of explore it in more detail once you've absorbed some of the content. So you can check that out on my website, which is just alexmanos.co.uk. So those are kind of the two big projects ultimately at the moment.
Cool. Perfect. All right. Thank you, Alex.
Cheers, Al. Thank you, everyone.
Oh, what a podcast. Literally loved that podcast. Learned so much from it. Alex is such a wealth of knowledge and information. Probably one of the most qualified and learned people that I know, honestly. Is always amazes me every time I speak to him. So I hope you enjoyed that podcast as much as I did. I've got so much from it that I'm going to take away and add into my own daily routine. So please let me know how you get on. If you give any of these things a go yourself, let me know. And then if you enjoyed the podcast, hit subscribe, and then it can help us keep growing the podcast and getting on more awesome guests like Alex Manos. See you next week.